Section 4 of Selections from the Principles of Philosophy by René Descartes, translated by John Veitch. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Of the Principles of Human Knowledge. 46. It is shown, from the example of pain, that a perception may be clear without being distinct, but that it cannot be distinct unless it is clear. For example, when any one feels intense pain, the knowledge which he has of this pain is very clear, but it is not always distinct, for men usually confound it with the obscure judgment they form regarding its nature, and think that there is in the suffering part something similar to the sensation of pain of which they are alone conscious. And thus perception may be clear without being distinct, but it can never be distinct without likewise being clear. 47. That, to correct the prejudices of our early years, we must consider what is clear in each of our simple notions. And indeed, in our early years, the mind was so immersed in the body, that, although it perceived many things with sufficient clearness, it yet knew nothing distinctly, and since even at that time we exercised our judgment in many matters, numerous prejudices were thus contracted, which, by the majority, are never afterwards laid aside. But that we may now be in a position to get rid of these, I will here briefly enumerate all the simple notions of which our thoughts are composed, and distinguish in each what is clear from what is obscure, or fitted to lead into error. 48. That all the objects of our knowledge are to be regarded either 1. As things or the affection of things, or 2. As eternal truths with the enumeration of things. Whatever objects fall under our knowledge we consider either as things or the affections of things, or as eternal truths possessing no existence beyond our thought. Of the first class the most general are substance, duration, order, number, and perhaps also some others, which notions apply to all the kinds of things. I do not, however, recognize more than two highest kinds, summa genera, of things. The first of intellectual things are such as have the power of thinking, including mind or thinking substance and its properties. The second of material things, embracing extended substance, or body and its properties. Perception, volition, and all modes as well of knowing as of willing, are related to thinking substance. On the other hand, to extended substance we refer magnitude, or extension in length, breadth, and depth, figure, motion, situation, the visibility of parts themselves, and the like. There are, however, beside these, certain things of which we have an internal experience that ought not to be referred either to the mind of itself, or to the body alone, but to the close and intimate union between them, as will hereafter be shown in its place. Of this class are the appetites of hunger and thirst, etc., and also the emotions or passions of the mind which are not exclusively mental affections, as the emotions of anger, joy, sadness, love, etc. And finally all the sensations, as of pain, titillation, light and colors, sounds, smells, tastes, heat, hardness, and the other tactile qualities. 49. That the external truths cannot be thus enumerated, but that this is not necessary. What I have already enumerated we are to regard as things, or the qualities or modes of things. We now come to speak of eternal truths. When we apprehend that it is impossible a thing can arise from nothing, this proposition, ex nihilo nihil fit, is not considered as somewhat existing, or as the mode of a thing, but as an eternal truth having its seat in our mind, and is called a common notion or axiom. Of this class are the following. It is impossible the same thing can at once be and not be. What is done cannot be undone. He who thinks must exist while he thinks, and innumerable others, the whole of which it is indeed difficult to enumerate, but this is not necessary, since, if blinded by no prejudices, we cannot fail to know them when the occasion of thinking them occurs. 50. That these truths are clearly perceived, but not equally by all men, on account of prejudices. And, indeed, with regard to these common notions, it is not to be doubted that they can be clearly and distinctly known, for otherwise they would not merit this appellation; as, in truth, some of them are not, with respect to all men, equally deserving of the name, because they are not equally admitted by all; not, however, from this reason, as I think, that the faculty of knowledge of one man extends farther than that of another, but rather because these common notions are opposed to the prejudices of some, who, on this account, are not able readily to embrace them, even although others, who are free from those prejudices, apprehend them with the greatest clearness. 51. What substance is, and that the term is not applicable to God and the creatures in the same sense. But with regard to what we consider as things or the modes of things, it is worth while to examine each of them by itself. By substance we can conceive nothing else than a thing which exists in such a way as to stand in need of nothing beyond itself in order to its existence. And in truth there can be conceived but one substance which is absolutely independent, and that is God. We perceive that all other things can exist only by help of the concourse of God. And accordingly the term substance does not apply to God and the creatures univocally, to adopt a term familiar in the schools. That is, no signification of this word can be distinctly understood which is common to God and them. 52. That the term is applicable univocally to the mind and the body, and how substance itself is known. Created substances, however, whether corporeal or thinking, may be conceived under this common concept, for these are things which, in order to their existence, stand in need of nothing but the concourse of God. But yet substance cannot be first discovered merely from its being a thing which exists independently, for existence by itself is not observed by us. We easily, however, discover substance itself from any attribute of it, by this common notion that of nothing there are no attributes, properties, or qualities. For, from perceiving that some attribute is present, we infer that some existing thing or substance to which it may be attributed is also of necessity present. 53. That of every substance there is one principal attribute, as thinking of the mind, extension of the body. But although any attribute is sufficient to lead us to the knowledge of substance, there is, however, one principal property of every substance, which constitutes its nature or essence, and upon which all the others depend. Thus extension in length, breadth, and depth constitutes the nature of corporeal substance, and thought the nature of thinking substance. For every other thing that can be attributed to body presupposes extension, and is only some mode of an extended thing, as all the properties we discover in the mind are only diverse modes of thinking. Thus, for example, we cannot conceive figure unless in something extended, nor motion unless in extended space, nor imagination, sensation, or will unless in a thinking thing. But, on the other hand, we can conceive extension without figure or motion, and thought without imagination or sensation, and so of the others, as is clear to any one who attends to these matters. 54. How we may have clear and distinct notions of the substance which thinks, of that which is corporeal, and of God. And thus we may easily have two clear and distinct notions or ideas, the one of created substance, which thinks, the other of a corporeal substance, provided we carefully distinguish all the attributes of thought from those of extension. We may also have a clear and distinct idea of an uncreated and independent thinking substance, that is, of God, provided we do not suppose that this idea adequately represents to us all that is in God, and do not mix up with it anything fictitious, but attend simply to the characters that are comprised in the notion we have of him, and which we clearly know to belong to the nature of an absolutely perfect being. For no one can deny that there is in us such an idea of God, without groundlessly supposing that there is no knowledge of God at all in the human mind. 55. How duration, order, and number may be also distinctly conceived. We will also have the most distinct conceptions of duration, order, and number, if, in place of mixing up with our notions of them that which properly belongs to the concept of substance, we merely think that the duration of a thing is a mode under which we conceive this thing, in so far as it continues to exist; and in like manner that order and number are not in reality different from things disposed in order and numbered, but only modes under which we diversely consider these things. 56. What are modes, qualities, attributes? And indeed, we here understand by modes the same with what we elsewhere designate attributes or qualities. But when we consider substance as affected or varied by them, we use the term modes. When from this variation it may be denominated of such a kind, we adopt the term qualities, to designate the different modes which cause it to be so named. And finally, when we simply regard these modes as in the substance, we call them attributes. Accordingly, since God must be conceived as superior to change, it is not proper to say that there are modes or qualities in him, but simply attributes. And even in created things that which is found in them always in the same mode, as existence and duration in the thing which exists and endures, ought to be called attribute and not mode or quality. 57. That some attributes exist in the things to which they are attributed, and others only in our thought, and what duration and time are. Of these attributes or modes there are some which exist in the things themselves, and others that have only an existence in our thought. Thus, for example, time, which we distinguish from duration taken in its generality, and call the measure of motion, is only a certain mode under which we think duration itself, for we do not conceive the duration of things that are moved to be different from the duration of things that are not moved; as is evident from this, that if two bodies are in motion for an hour, the one moving quickly and the other slowly, we do not reckon more time in the one than in the other, although there may be much more motion in the one of the bodies than in the other. But that we may comprehend the duration of all things under a common measure, we compare their duration with that of the greatest and most regular motions that give rise to years and days, and which we call time. Hence what is so designated is nothing superadded to duration, taken in its generality, but a mode of thinking. 58. That number and all universals are only modes of thought. In the same way, number, when it is not considered as in created things, but merely in the abstract or in general, is only a mode of thinking, and the same is true of all those general ideas we call universals. 59. How universals are formed, and what are the five common, viz., genus, species, difference, property, and accident. Universals arise merely from our making use of one and the same idea in thinking of all individual objects between which there subsists a certain likeness, and when we comprehend all the objects represented by this idea under one name, this term likewise becomes universal. For example, when we see two stones, and do not regard their nature farther than to remark that there are two of them, we form the idea of a certain number, which we call the binary; and when we afterwards see two birds or two trees, and merely take notice of them so far as to observe that there are two of them, we again take up the same idea as before, which is accordingly universal; and we likewise give to this number the same universal appellation of binary. In the same way, when we consider a figure of three sides, we form a certain idea, which we call the idea of a triangle, and we afterwards make use of it as the universal to represent to our mind all other figures of three sides. But when we remark more particularly that of figures of three sides, some have a right angle and others not, we form the universal idea of a right-angled triangle, which, being related to the preceding as more general, may be called species; and the right angle the universal difference by which right-angled triangles are distinguished from all others; and farther, because the square of the side which sustains the right angle is equal to the squares of the other two sides, and because this property belongs only to this species of triangles, we may call it the universal property of the species. Finally, if we suppose that of these triangles some are moved and others not, this will be their universal accident, and accordingly we commonly reckon five universals, viz., genus, species, difference, property, accident. 60. Of distinctions, and first of the real. But number in things themselves arises from the distinction there is between them; and distinction is threefold, viz., real, modal, and of reason. The real properly subsists between two or more substances, and it is sufficient to assure us that two substances are really mutually distinct, if only we are able clearly and distinctly to conceive the one of them without the other. For the knowledge we have of God renders it certain that he can effect all that of which we have a distinct idea. Wherefore, since we have now, for example, the idea of an extended and corporeal substance, though we as yet do not know with certainty whether any such thing is really existent, nevertheless, merely because we have the idea of it, we may be assured that such may exist; and, if it really exists, that every part which we can determine by thought must be really distinct from the other parts of the same substance. In the same way, since every one is conscious that he thinks, and that he in thought can exclude from himself every other substance, whether thinking or extended, it is certain that each of us thus considered is really distinct from every other thinking and corporeal substance. And although we suppose that God united a body to a soul so closely that it was impossible to form a more intimate union, and thus made a composite whole, the two substances would remain really distinct, notwithstanding this union; for with whatever tie God connected them, he was not able to rid himself of the power he possessed of separating them, or of conserving the one part from the other, and the things which God can separate or conserve separately are really distinct. End of section 4.